Hey guys, welcome back to the Apostle Paul's television channel. I'm Breck, and I want to ask you guys a question. Are you going through a challenge? Are you going through a challenge? Well, tonight we're going to look at three words. We're going to look at the definitions of them. I don't know if you're like me, I'm kind of a word nerd, but you know what? One of the mistakes I made in Christianity was I never started to look into what words mean. I took the pastor's word for what I heard, that was the word, and I didn't verify it. I didn't look into the meaning. So one of the things I want to encourage you with is the things that you're hearing, look into the meaning of them. It helps us to understand. It helps things make a lot more sense. So we're going to look into three specific words and their definitions, and I hope that will help you guys. So one of the things that we're going to look into is I want you to think about, and when we talk about the definition, I want you to think about it. Think about what it means. Think about how it relates to your life. And of course, the title of this is, are you going through a challenge? We're going to look at the Apostle Paul tonight. We're going to look at one of his major challenges, what he says about it, what God was doing with him. And I believe that it's really going to help you with the challenge you may be going through right now, but most importantly, the challenges that are coming and being able to use these things we talk about tonight for your advantage. So, are you going through a challenge? The first word I want you to think about, we're going to talk about, is perspective. Perspective, a particular way of considering something, your mental view of the way you are looking at something. So your mental view, the way that you see it, your perspective. So that's the first word I want you to think about in regards to, are you going through a challenge, and your perspective or your view of this specific challenge. I'm going to pick it up in verse 7. Wherefore also, lest I should be lifted up by the transcendence of the revelations, there was given to me a splinter in the flesh, a messenger of Satan, that he may be buffeting me, lest I may be lifted up. For this I entreat the Lord thrice. So three times he had called out to the Lord that it should withdraw from me. So basically, Lord, I don't want this splinter in my flesh. This messenger of Satan. Can you get rid of it? Can you get rid of it? He asked him three times. I want you to listen real close to the Lord's response. And he said, and he has protested to me. So this is the Lord's response. Sufficient for you is my grace, for my power in infirmity is being perfected. My power in infirmity is being perfected. So Paul asked him three times, get rid of this splinter, man. You think about a splinter. I love, every single word has meaning. You think about a splinter, guys. I've gotten a splinter several times. I'm sure you have too. It's got a little bit of a sting to it. It's painful, but it's nagging. It's like, I got to get this out of here because it's nagging at me. So that's painting a picture for what was happening with the Apostle Paul. This messenger of Satan was nagging him. And it's interesting because his revelation of Christ was so great that this messenger of Satan was given to him to keep him in the right position, not above everyone else, because of these revelations. So there was a purpose that God had with this. Now, the Apostle Paul, from his perspective, when this first happened to him, may not have seen what God's purpose was. Think about it for a second, the very challenge that you're going through. The very challenge that you're going through, a lot of times we look at, why is this happening to me? Not understanding God has a purpose, that he wants to reveal his grace through you to somebody else, or he wants you to see his grace and how powerful it is in helping you overcome this challenge. So instead of looking to, why is this happening to me, having that perspective, start to look at, okay, Lord, you got a specific purpose for this, and your grace is sufficient to carry me through this. So when you think about grace, I want you to think about God's ability. So correlate grace, God's empowerment, God's ability with what you're going through. Now think about this for a second. There's no way that Jesus Christ could endure the lashings that he did. There's no way he can endure the cross unless it was God's ability causing him to do so. So I don't think Jesus, especially when he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? When he became the serpent, when he was in darkness in his perspective. He was seeing himself. He wasn't seeing God's purpose, that God was revealing his grace through all of this, that it was impossible for this man, this human being, Jesus Christ, to withstand the cross without God's ability. He couldn't withstand the lashings and then be put on the cross unless it was God's grace, God's ability to cause him to do so. So I want you to look at your challenge, and I want you to recognize and acknowledge, I've got God's ability. I've got God's ability. And you know what? God's ability is greater than this challenge. God's ability is so great. His grace is so empowering that he rose a helpless, lifeless, deader than a doornail Jesus from the grave with his grace. So his ability. So I want you to start to, when you encounter these challenges, you've got God's grace with you. You got his ability. What can overcome you against God's ability, God's grace? Nothing. God's grace wins every time. So I want you to think and use and acknowledge God's grace. So one of the things that he says in 2 Corinthians verse 12, he says, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power in infirmity is being perfected. Infirmity, here's the second definition. Infirmity means the inability to produce. So think about that. God's ability, his power, it says in infirmity is being perfected. So in our inability to produce, God's ability, God's power is perfected. It's seen, it's made known. And Paul says that he boasts in his infirmities. He boasts in all his inabilities to produce, to overcome in and of himself. Boast in your infirmities, in your inabilities, knowing that your Father's ability, his grace, is going to overcome this for you. I want to leave you guys with this. Go over to 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 10. I want you to see this in action, and I want you to know that his grace is not just a word, a thought, a Sunday description. It is a practical, useful, empowering gift that you have right now, and it's always with you, that no matter what challenge you go through, you have him to overcome it. See his grace, his empowerment, his ability, and know that the challenge and encounter is subjected according to his grace that is with you. The other word is ability. We talked about, I want you to think of God's grace as God's ability. The word ability means the power to do something. Trust in his ability. For we're infirm, we're unable to produce. Yet in recognizing that his strength, his power is perfected. It's perfect in overcoming your challenge. I want to leave you guys with this. This is awesome. And this is the Apostle Paul talking about God's grace. And I want you to think about this when you come across any challenge, regardless of whatever it is. You know, you got a sink full of dishes. You've got something you can't figure out. You're in a life or death situation. You're whatever it is. Remember his ability is with you. And I'm going to leave you with this. 1 Corinthians 15, verse 10. Yet in the grace of God, yet in the ability of God, God's ability, I am what I am. And his grace, his ability, which is in me. Where is it? It's in me. Did not come to be for naught, but more exceedingly than all of them toil I. Yet not I, but the grace of God which is with me. The grace of God is with you. God's ability. Guys, God's ability is what you take to every encounter. God's ability. And it's his grace, his ability, that causes you to overcome every encounter and challenge. To God be the glory. See you next time. Thanks for joining.